This episode of On the Air is brought to you by Zoho, one of the world's most prolific software companies, trusted by over 100 million users worldwide. Zoho's comprehensive financial platform offers applications from accounting, billing, inventory, expense to payroll management, and much, much more, all within an integrated ecosystem. Plus, their dedicated partner program is designed to empower accountants like you to deliver greater value to your clients. Visit zoho.com/CPA to grow your firm and take your practice to new heights. Welcome to On the Air with Accounting Today. I'm Editor-in-Chief Dan Hood. When we talk about the M&A market for accounting firms, most of us sort of have a bias to thinking about deals among the big and the mid-sized firms, the sort of top 500 deals that get mentioned in the media. But there are literally tens of thousands of other firms that may be looking for or considering a deal. And that market is changing just as rapidly, if not more rapidly, than the market for among the bigger firms. Here to talk about all of that is Brannon Poe. He's the founder of Poe Group Advisors. He's been advising firms on M&A and sales for more than 2 decades. Brannon, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Dan. Nice to be here.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of being on your podcast, and at the end of it, I was like, wow, this guy knows what he's doing. He should be on more podcasts. He should be on our podcast. And we got into this topic because it's not one that people talk enough about. Because there's so many thousands of firms for whom it's probably more relevant than some of the talk about larger firm M&A might be. Maybe a good place to start would be to talk about what does a traditional small firm deal or the small firm M&A market looked like in the past? Was it, small firms merging up? Was it 2 small firms combining? How would you characterize it?
Yeah, so I would say, we've always had a variety of different types of buyers looking at deals. So you have, from the individual buyer who's like maybe 1 or 2 people who are leaving a firm, maybe they're managers who really want to be on their own, don't want to wait for a partner. Those were good buyers for smaller firms. Then you'd have other firms that wanted to grow through acquisition. That's always gone on. Those are the kind of the main types of buyers. And then you'd have large firms. We've even sold to KPMG. So you'd have large firms buying small firms in certain situations where it was a very strategic purchase. And now we have private equity in the mix. So we've kind of divided that into the 4 major buyer types.
Right. Well, and they're brand new, right? That's brand new to everybody to the field.
They are, and they've made a lot of difference. So what we used to see is as firms like went from say 1 to 10 million, which is our primary market in revenue. And what we used to see is that the multiple as the firm grew the multiple and the terms would get weaker as the firm got larger. Now that has flipped. And now as firms get larger, up into that 4, 5 and up, there's more interest from consolidators. So that has driven those multiples up and those terms have improved. As firms get bigger.
And is that most of that change being driven by private equity coming in? Are they the ones who are buying those 4 and 5 million firms, or?
Well, we still have a lot of different types of buyers, but the private equity, that's where private equity kind of starts. I would say like when you get to 3 million, there are even consolidators that'll look at deals that are under 3 million in revenue. We've seen as small as $1 million in revenue be at least on the radar of private equity if they already have a home base in that metro area. So, they're I call them tuck-ins. So they could tuck in. But when you get up in that 5 million range and higher, there's a lot of private equity interest, and the private equity firms are very, you've got small ones and you've got larger ones. So it's not dissimilar in terms of the buyer, the way buyers operate in this market. It's, you've got consolidators that won't look at anything less than 5 million. You've got some that won't look at anything less than 20 and so on. So.
But there are some key differences, right? In terms of how PE firms are going about buying things that are, one of the things we talk about is they bring a lot of cash that, right, you didn't used to see, or at least that's my impression. Maybe I should clarify that, right? The previous, a traditional, put it this way, traditional accounting firm acquisition, whether it was of a small firm or a large firm, didn't involve a lot of cash on the table. It involved, you'll join us, you'll become a partner kind of thing. And it seems like that's changed a lot. Is that changing at the smaller level as well?
It is, and we've often seen cash deals. We've been kind of a proponent of cash deals for smaller firms for years. But when firms got larger, the terms tend to be more buyer favorable. And I do think that has shifted with private equity, is there's a lot of demand. So it's like any market. If you've got higher demand, the price and terms are going to strengthen. It's just a supply and demand equation.
That's interesting. I hadn't realized that there was cash involved for a lot of the smaller deals. I guess they're smaller deals. It's easier to put up a smaller amount of cash if you're buying $100 million firm. That's a different chunk of change than if you're buying $1 million firm, say, or a $600,000 practice or that sort of thing.
Right. Well, there's a lot of good financing for CPA firms. So the SBA program works great under $5 million. And so a lot of times sellers can get significant cash at closing. That's kind of helped by that SBA program.
Sure. And is that now, are the prices now changing a lot, or the terms changing because of PE? How is that all impacting the market?
We're definitely seeing upward price pressure on the market as a whole. And, we've been kind of testing over the last 2 or 3 years. We keep testing those boundaries, and we keep seeing upward movement. So it's a little bit of the Wild West right now. This whole market has really, it's still very much a moving, changing marketplace. And I mean, I just saw Baker Tilly made a big announcement. I just saw that. That was in the Wall Street Journal this morning. I mean, so it's national news. And so this market, and they're talking about maybe taking that public one day. So can you imagine if there's a public market for large CPA firms, that's just going to pull everything into that private equity world even more so.
Well, you were talking about, private equity firms having, we won't go below 5 million, or we won't go below 20 million, or we won't go below 50 million. There's some people who talk about, well, in the end, what's just going to happen is if you're accumulating firms, you're consolidating firms below 5 million, what eventually is going to happen is your collection of consolidated firms is going to get big enough that one of those bigger PE firms comes along and buys you, right? You're really just serving to package it up for a larger PE acquirer.
That is exactly their strategy. That is their whole, I mean, not their whole strategy, but that is a big part of where their profit comes from. Because, as the entity gets larger, and I see this with small firms even, as you get larger, the firm becomes more stable, the revenue becomes more predictable. If you lose a staff member, you've got other people that can easily fill in. So it just becomes more stable as it gets larger.
Gotcha. I want to talk a lot. There's a lot of details in terms of how this is going to impact how small firms think about what M&A might look for them, what a transition strategy might look for them. But I want to start, and there's a lot of different ways to approach that, but maybe we can start. One way to approach it would be to say, how much do smaller firms need to rethink their transition, or do they need to rethink their transition plan if it involved some kind of sale or M&A or that sort of thing? Is it really completely upending how firms are going to transition, how owners are going to transition from active careers to retirement?
Yeah, it's a good question. I wish I had a really clear answer. I don't. I think private equity is going to be a cycle. Like if you look at how private equity has moved through other industries, it typically, it'll be a 5 to 15-year cycle. So we don't know how long the cycle will be. I think the smart strategy, if you own a firm and you're thinking about exiting, I think it's smart to plan as soon as possible. And usually that plan means a couple of things. One, you got to make sure there's a way for partners to exit that want to exit. And unfortunately, in small firms, that's not always the case. Their partnership agreements or shareholder agreements don't fully cover that exit scenario. And then you've got the whole governance, like how are small firms, how is that decision made? And that's usually not as well covered in agreements as I would like to see. And then, but the other part of the exit strategy is just building a good firm, right? So if you want to make your firm easy to sell or easy for you to exit, just if it's profitable, if it's a healthy firm with a good team, you're probably not going to have that much trouble exiting when you want to.
Well, let me pin you down on that. I mean, because I think for a long time there were a lot of accounting firms, a lot of accountants, and when I say a long time, I mean for 30 or 40 years, there was a lot of accounting firms who just said, well, I'll when I retire, I'll just sell my practice, on the assumption that there would always be someone to sell it to. And we've certainly there's been such a frenzy of M&A activity over the past 15 years at the very least, and then even gotten even crazier with the last 5 with PE, that I think there is a general assumption that, yeah, I'm pretty much going to always be able to sell my firm. Is that really true? I mean, obviously, unless you're bankrupt and falling apart and have no clients, and there's rats wandering around in your printers.
Yeah, I think
apart from those, right? Apart from obviously unsellable, is it pretty much true that anyone can sell their firm?
I think that is a safe assumption right now in today's market, with one exception. I believe that rural firms where they're not highly profitable are getting more and more difficult to sell, and they take longer to sell. So if you're in a small town and you have a traditional firm, in contrast to a virtual, fully remote team type of firm, and if you're not profitable and doing some things that are really to make your firm highly desirable, it can be very difficult, and it can take a long time to find a good buyer.
Not excellent. Sorry. I mean, it's a fascinating point. I should have said excellent. That's terrible
Yeah.
for them. But it's precisely the sort of interesting stuff that I think they need to know and to hear about. And I want to hear more about it, and I want to dive more into what it means to make yourself an attractive M&A target and all sort of stuff. But we're going to take a quick break before that. Thanks again to our sponsor, Zoho. Their powerful suite of finance applications help you and your clients stay organized, tax ready, and in control of back office operations. Learn more at zoho.com/CPA after this episode to join their partner program and see how you can leverage their cutting-edge solutions to drive business growth. And we're back. We're talking with Brannon Poe of Poe Group Advisors. We're talking about the market for M&A, particularly for small firms. As I say, it's an angle of the market, an aspect of the market that doesn't often get talked about, and given the number of firms in this sort of, we'll call it the 42,500 firms that are below the top 500 or top 1,000. It's pretty important because a lot of people are hinging their retirements on it. We were talking about what firms might have difficulty selling. You mentioned rural firms that aren't necessarily shining stars, right? Haven't made themselves as profitable as possible. I want to look into a bunch of different things. One, about what a small firm can and should do and how it should be looking at the market. But before we do that, I want to ask a quick question. How much do you think small firms should be expecting a private equity firm, specifically as a private equity firm, to come knocking on their doors? Do you expect a lot of small firms to see that, or should that not even be something they're expecting? They should be looking in a different way.
I think most of the people listening to this have probably been approached. I would say that there is a pretty aggressive marketing effort by a lot of firms to send emails and letters to firms. So I wouldn't be surprised to hear that people are getting approached. A lot of those would-be sellers, I think, are a little reluctant to reach out to private equity, and that's or to respond to some of those outreaches. But they're a funny animal. As I mentioned earlier, it's a little bit of the Wild West, and we see some really good firms that are consolidating and they're doing a good job, and they have the staff and the leadership to do a good job with it. And then there are others that are really they're not so ethical. They're not so trustworthy in deal making. Like, they do some kind of funny things as deals go through. So we're seeing a real big effort on our part to kind of help filter those and try to find out who's going to be good to deal with and who's not.
Right. Without naming any names, can you give an example of a trick someone's trying to put into a contract, or that kind of questionable deal making, as you said? Again, I'm not looking for names, but just a sample of what that might look like.
Well, one thing that I see a lot is, like, the hook will be really attractive. Like, say, hey, we can give you this crazy high multiple, and we can do this two-stage deal. And the second bite at the apple might be, they'll throw out a big number. And then when you get the contract and you start reading the fine print, you realize like, oh, well, if the stars completely line up and we hit, it's
During a hailstorm in July on the
yeah,
4th of, yeah. Okay.
there's the fine print can be really, where those futuristic payouts are very unlikely to happen. So,
A standard, but a standard oversell hype kind of thing. It's
yeah, and another thing that I've seen happen too is they don't, they're really trying to beat the practice up during due diligence. So they're not coming in with a number that's firm at all. Some of them, they just want to get you involved, get you locked into an exclusive negotiation, and then kind of beat the practice up and beat it down. And
that's interesting because I've heard something similar. But my understanding, someone was telling me, and I can't remember, it was someone from a PE firm, which would have made sense. But someone was telling me that that was a standard PE thing, right? That they got you involved and then did their absolutely brutal due diligence. A due diligence that for standard accounting firm M&A seems really invasive and intrusive, and like you said, beating the firm up. But someone had said that, like I said, someone had mentioned to me that that was a standard M&A, a standard PE thing. That it wasn't a
well,
that it wasn't a,
I think the due diligence being difficult is pretty standard. The due diligence from PE is thorough, and it's almost always done by a third party. Not always, but often it's done by a third party. So, they're following a really lengthy checklist, if you will, and it's pretty rough. But sometimes that can be, some of those things are, they're templated and they're not relevant. And so sometimes when you cross out all the irrelevant stuff, it's not quite so bad, but it takes an effort to get to that point where they realize it's not important or not necessary.
so at the very least, firms one ought to be aware that the initial promises may not be fulfilled, or may not be would only happen if, as you say, the stars align perfectly. And two, to be aware of that there's a fairly serious due diligence process that's going to happen at some point, probably later, and as you said, a little later in the process, I think, than most people would expect, right? Given we've been talking for months now, and now is the time when you start, going through everything with a fine-tooth comb. I think is probably surprising for some folks.
Yeah, and I think too, a lot of times these deals, they'll start the deal making before they even really know who's going to operate the firm. They'll want the seller to stay in and operate, which is not ideal, because someone who wants to sell usually wants to sell because they want to exit at some point in the near future. So a lot of times a seller, when they're evaluating a PE firm and they get into like, okay, who's going to operate this? How's it going to be operated? That's where the deal kind of falls apart, because I would say the vast majority of CPAs, they really care a lot about their clients. They care a lot about their staff and their reputation. And, sometimes it's a little late when they figure out like, wow, this really just isn't a fit. Like, this is not going to this is not good for the firm. So,
And as you say, at that point, you're sort of locked in. You've spent a long time building a relationship, building a negotiating platform with these people, and suddenly the pressure to not give up, to walk away from the sunk costs can be
yep,
can be
sunk
difficult.
cost fallacy. Exactly.
Yeah. Let's talk about you talked about what you've talked in sort of broad terms about what what firms want to do. They want to make sure they're profitable and so on. Maybe we can go dive a little more deeply into what makes an attractive M&A candidate, not just for PE, but just in general, and what firms, particularly small firms, can and should be doing specifically to make sure that, hey, when people come looking, yes, as we said, sort of they're reaching out to everybody, but let's be in the front row when they start reaching out.
Well, I think I'll start with owner hours, because high owner hours, not uncommon, but they tend to point to a firm that's owner centric, like highly owner centric. So if your firm is that way, anything you can do to lessen that will make it more attractive. So we, when we're looking at practices, we're looking at two primary metrics. We want to see the profitability of the firm to be high, and we want to see the owner hours to be as low as possible. So a lot of people think, well, how does that match up? But it requires leadership, and it requires, I mean, all these things, Dan. Like it requires really strategic. You have to have a good pricing model. You have to have a good client selection process. You've got to have. I mean, there's a lot of different factors and different ways to get there, but I think it's hard to get there without a good pricing model, right? So, if you're trying to get your firm attractive, sometimes that's the first place to look at your pricing model, and go from there. So,
There's definitely, it seems like when we talk to people who are experts in M&A and transitions and that sort of thing, like you, one of the things that a lot of people say is it seems like when you add up all the different things they're saying is you want to sort of indicate that you're thinking about your firm, right? That you're thinking in a modern way about your firm. You're not just a traditional accounting firm. Like you said, having talked or thought about your pricing models, right? Smart firms have been doing this or have been told to do this for a long time. Not all of them have done it, but more and more firms are doing it. But it's when you go into a firm and you look and you say, wow, you haven't changed your pricing in 10 years. That tells me, that's a good proxy for 10 other things that say you might not be a good fit for me. And similarly, technology is one where we hear from, acquirers look at a technology thing and say, if you're using technology from 5 years ago or 4 years ago, you're not fully on the cloud, that sort of thing. That tells me something philosophically and culturally about your firm that sort of keeps me from, it sort of makes, that's a red flag for me. Is that a fair assessment to say, these things sort of indicate a backwardness on the part of a firm, even if you haven't done it, to at least to have thought about it? It says something.
It does, and it if you're looking at it from the buyer's perspective, if your systems are really outdated, not only do you have to change the systems, but you've got to change all the mindsets on the team, and you've got to train. And if you've got team members that are very change resistant, because that's been the culture of that firm, then that could be problematic for a buyer who wants to consolidate or wants to just put the firm in a better direction. It's not always the case. Like, you can have a great culture and a great firm with old systems. I have seen some pretty well-run firms on old systems, but it is an indicator to look a little deeper, because it could be that it's just the culture is change resistant as well.
Right. So if you're looking on old systems, and when you say systems, I mean, we were talking about technology, but you could think about any kind of processes. Pricing is a process and a system, right? And your marketing and your business development are a process and a system. Any one of those, if you haven't changed them in a while, people are going to come in and say, well, why haven't you? And maybe it's because you got it right the first time and it's perfect and we don't need to worry about it. But if I'm acquiring you, I'm probably going to double check that to make sure, right?
Exactly. And the cash flow, more often than not, I think a lot of this stuff shows up in the cash flow. If you've got really efficient systems, that's going to show up in the cash flow. If you've got a good culture, that's going to show up in the longevity of your team. So there are a lot of, like, bottom line things that really, kind of point to the whole entity at a larger scale, right? It's so if you've got a good pricing model, your profit's going to be good, probably.
Makes sense. There's one question. There's a million more things we could go on. This is a huge topic, and I think we've only just started to peel back the outermost layer of it. But before we go, I want to talk a little bit about an aspect of M&A for smaller firms that I don't know that a lot of people think about, and that's the possibility of them going out and acquiring firms, right? Even if you're $1 million firm, there's plenty of $600,000, $500,000 practices out there that you might be looking at. Do you see a lot of that, or are there a lot of smaller firms out there acquiring even smaller firms? Is that something that happens on a regular basis?
It does. It happens. It happens really all the time, and I think acquisition can be a great way to grow. I think scaling a company can be really hard. Scaling an accounting practice is really hard at certain points. Like, we see there be kind of like Dan Sullivan calls it the ceiling of complexity. He's the founder of Strategic Coach. He calls it a ceiling of complexity where, and this is kind of normal in any business, is like you grow and then all of a sudden everything just kind of becomes like this major problem to break through. Like your systems start to break, your processes don't work anymore, and you have to like do something really different to break through. And an acquisition often can force that. And what is a problem for a $2.5 million firm kind of ceases to be a problem at a $5 million firm. So it just there's definitely the speed at which you're scaling the business. It accelerates you through those growing pains, right? So that those natural, when you grow organically, you're going to hit those ceilings, and you're going to have to intentionally find a way to bust through those ceilings to get to the next level. Whereas when you're doing an acquisition, it just expedites that whole process.
Right. Well, it's if you're the frog in the boiling water, if the water's going up 1 degree at a time, you don't notice it. But if it jumps 10 degrees all at once, suddenly you're like, oh, wait, this is a problem. I ought to jump. But of course, if it jumps 10 degrees, you're probably dead already. It's a terrible metaphor. Do you still, I mean, is that appetite for small firm combinations? Do you see it staying the same? Is it growing? Is it?
I think the talent shortage is sort of increasing that thirst for acquisitions because, we're seeing a lot of, we call them aqua hire. You're basically buying it for the talent. We had a 50-person firm in Canada that just recently got acquired, and it was primarily because it had a good team. The profitability wasn't all that great, but they had a good team and they had a lot of talented people on, and so we're seeing a lot of acquisitions that are talent focused.
Very cool. We had a joke around here that the ideal acquisition candidate for a lot of firms had 50 employees and no clients because they didn't need the clients. They had plenty of their own clients, but they needed the staff. So
yeah.
All right. Well, it is fascinating stuff, and as I said, we could spend a lot more time on it, but we're running out of time. So for now, Brannon Poe of Poe Group Advisors, thank you so much for joining us. It was great stuff.
Thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you all for listening. This episode of On the Air was produced by Accounting Today with audio production by Adnan Khan. Rate or review us on your favorite podcast platform and see the rest of our content on accountingtoday.com.